Before we get into the show, I wanted to put out a hiring call. I'm looking for my next software engineering apprentice, a young .NET programmer to help me directly with my work, building architectural prototypes, figuring out new patterns, tons of coding. And I'm looking for a .NET programmer whose hobby is also programming. For the right person, programming isn't work, it's play. And besides a job, I can guarantee that you will learn faster than you ever have before. And I will invest in your professional education and we'll work together and you will grow. You'll report directly to me. So if any of this sounds interesting to you, just send me an email or give me a call. Now, let's get into our show. Product Ownership with Richard Hundhausen.
The Azure DevOps Podcast is a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Each show brings you hard-hitting interviews with industry experts, innovating better methods, and sharing success stories. Listen on to learn how to increase quality, ship quickly, and operate well. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome to the show. I'm Jeffrey Palermo, your host for helping you and your teams move fast and deliver quality and to run your software with confidence in Azure, all while using everything that the .NET ecosystem has to offer. The podcast is sponsored by ClearMeasure, a full-service software architecture and engineering firm that serve companies that just have really important business-critical software projects. And when failure is not an option, ClearMeasure guarantees your success. And you can find them at clearmeasure.com. We are into the second year of my architect forums, and you can sign up for these online. The sessions, the signups are up. If you lead a software team and you're looking to collaborate with other peer lead architects who are leading their teams, then this forum is for you. It's free. It's collaborative over video call. You can be anywhere in the US. Sign up at the link in the show notes. And for those who are looking for Programming with Palermo, my video podcast, you can just search for it in any of the directories and you'll be able to find it. So my returning guest on the show, back from episode 100, is Richard Hundhausen. Richard helps software organizations and teams deliver better products by understanding and leveraging Azure DevOps and Scrum. And he's a professional Scrum trainer, a professional Scrum developer, author of the book Professional Scrum with Azure DevOps from Microsoft Press. He's also the co-creator of the Nexus Scaled Scrum framework. And as a software developer and consultant with over 30 years of experience, he understands that software is built and delivered by people and not by just processes or tools. So, Richard, welcome back to the show, my friend. How are you, sir?
Hey, my friend, it's good to be back. Thank you.
Yeah. It's been a while since we've had you on, and if the listeners haven't heard episode 100, we'll include a link to that in the show notes. But if we kind of go back, you've been in the custom software space and helping teams be really great at for a long time. Is there a point in your career where it kind of switched and you said, you know what? I've been building a lot of software, but let me help other teams be great too. Do you remember if there was a mental switch, or how did that come to be?
Well, we're going back a while, but I think, honestly, I replied to an ad in the paper. There was a company here in Boise, Idaho, looking for someone to do some software training. And I'm like, okay, what are the topics? And it was something silly like Paradox or DBase. Just can you teach this topic? I'm like, yes, I could teach that topic. Mm-hmm. So I showed up, and turns out it's kind of easy to teach developers. You just do three things. 1, tell them something they didn't know. 2, show them where the examples are. Show them where the samples are. Show them how Stack Overflow works or whatever. And 3, shut up and let them play with it. It's really kind of a no-brainer to teach developers. So for the next, how many ever years it was since then, I would teach, I would do, I would teach, I would do, go back and forth. Still doing that today.
Very cool. Very cool. And Scrum at this point is 20 years right out? Is that how old Scrum is? Because Azure Manifesto was one. 90
years.
Okay. And so you've got, just to kind of demystify some of this structure that newer developers might not be aware of, because you're a professional Scrum trainer, you're a professional Scrum developer, you've written a book on it, and So newer developers that didn't go through the meteoric rise of the popularity of Scrum, what all does that mean? What is a Scrum trainer? What is a Scrum developer?
Sure. So I was with Ken Schwaber in 2009. We were trying to come up with a rebuttal to Martin Fowler's wiki post of flaccid Scrum. This is the problem of people would send their Scrum Masters these 2-day classes. They'd come back and the team still couldn't get anything done. They weren't meeting definition of done. They were still delaying releases by months or even years. So we decided to take a different crack at it. We took a look at the developers, because that is most of the people on a Scrum team are developers, the technical people. Yeah. So we started with the Professional Scrum Developer program, and we focused on, technical excellence, definition of done, working as a team, all these things that you would think are just obvious, but they're not. There's still this knee-jerk reaction to, okay, the sprint has begun. Let's each take our own ticket, go off into our own basements and work on it all the way through to done on our own, and forget that you're part of a team, forget that you can collaborate, let alone mob, pair, or any of that. So honestly, it's just a lot of time I just spend reminding people, hey, you should talk to each other. It's not rocket science here. Talk to each other, work with each other, shift those conversations left, and maybe start to deliver value earlier.
Yeah. And I've encountered that too. Some teams that they say they're using Scrum, but when you get down into it, they've maybe adopted the name, this is a product backlog item, or, we do retrospectives. And then it's like, okay, we're doing Scrum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they take the nouns and they forget about the verbs, is what I say.
Well, that's an interesting concept. What are the verbs that you focus on?
Inspect, adapt, learn, improve, collaborate, share, let alone the values, commit, have courage, be open, have focus, be respectful. Those never go out of style.
Yeah, for sure. There's the developer side of this, but if there's a for the managers listening, or the CTOs that may have multiple development teams that are going, what are some things that they can maybe ask or look for as a signal that maybe they're not actually using everything that Scrum could provide to the team?
There are some common symptoms, but they're way too common so that managers might think this is just the way it is. Okay. But one of the big things is rollover. Oh, we didn't get something done. Let's just roll it over to the next sprint, and then again, and then again. That may be because we don't have a definition of done, or our definition of done is not being followed. So that's another symptom, is if you don't have a definition of done, your quality is going to vary from item to item. And then your increment, your product that you're building, is going to be very unstable if you've got different people contributing different levels of quality into it. I'd say the number one thing, though, that I run into over and over and over again is just not having the right teams. Organizations think that they're being, economical or smart by putting all of the database people together, all the web people together, all the security people together, ops people together. And I had quick story. I had a company come to me and said, hey, it currently takes 47 days for us to get something into production. From the green light to that item in the backlog, that user story, if you will, to production, 47 days. And I said, can you describe that to me? What do those 47 days look like? And they, classic problem. Well, the architects, then the hands off to the designers, hands off to the coders, hands off to the testers, back to the coders. Now we're at 3 weeks. Now we're going to go to the database people, the security people, the web people. Everyone's adding their piece to it. And then, finally it goes to ops, where it sits in the queue, and, a week later it gets into production. And then for some reason they thought that me introducing branching strategies and branching patterns was going to solve this. And I said, I think it's going to make the number go up, not down. I said, here's how you solve it. And I'm in a room of like 40 people, Jeffrey, with all the managers in here. And I said, take one of the architects, a designer, a coder, a tester, maybe grab 2 coders, database person, security person, ops person, put them all on the same team, call them something like the Avengers or something generic, and then give them the authority, give them the permissions and the passwords to do all the things. Now we're down to 7 days, if not less. And that's the answer. But nobody wants to hear that because that's hard.
Because you're moving people's cheese.
Moving the cheese.
The work just sits there waiting for most of that 47 days, for 40 of the 47 days.
Bing, bing, bing.
Yeah, it just sits there. Nobody's actually working on it because the actual work only needed 7 days. Yeah. So I heard a lot of handoffs. I heard a lot of separation, a lot of people not talking to people. And just every time you hand off, you basically insert minimum of a day at the best case scenario, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Also, they don't talk to each other. They wait till a ticket shows up in their column and then they go work on it. So if there's some delay in that ticket, notification getting to my inbox or whatever, then there might be an extra day there that I didn't realize that was in my column to start working on. It's like people just seem to be allergic to talking to people these days.
Yeah, that was a concept that's in the text of agilemanifesto.org. Like regardless of Scrum versus extreme programming or anything else, it's kind of one of the core tenets is motivated teams that have all the necessary skill sets and including, talking with the customer frequently, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's the first agile value. You want individuals' interactions over putting things in columns and letting alerts send emails to me.
Yeah. So these teams, I'm guessing self-implementation of Scrum as opposed to any kind of training whatsoever, because that would be one of the first things that's covered in any kind of Scrum training, right? You need to change your org chart.
Scrum does require cross-functional teams, but that is kind of left up to interpretation. I know how I interpret that, and that is you've got someone on the team that can do all the different tasks that need to be done to meet the definition of done. Some organizations don't read it that way. They think, all of the coding, and then we can hand it off to another group of testers or another team that does the ops or the database or whatever, and that's not the case. But again, this is a hard message because I'm talking to managers whose cheese I'm suggesting that they move. So Jeffrey, if you're a QA manager and I say, hey, you need to take your testers that report directly to you and put them over on self-managing teams, that message isn't going to land very well with you.
Yeah. Because instantly you have to adopt some type of matrix. Like I'm thinking the military. You have pilots who can move troops, but then you have the airborne, the paratroopers who are going to jump out of the plane. Well, somewhere there is a group that makes really good pilots, and there's a chief that kind of oversees pilots. But pilots by themselves really can't accomplish any mission. They actually need paratroopers in the plane and mechanics to make the plane, serviceable. And so it sounds like a similar matrix organization at that scale. Big companies where, a QA manager makes sense because we have to cultivate a broad skill of QA, but they need to be deployed in a unit that can accomplish a mission.
There you go. Brilliant. I mean, at the end of the day, I don't really care who the people report to as far as HR goes, but they do need to be part of a self-managing team. And by the way, side note, you may not be doing 40 hours or even 20 hours a week of your specialty. So if you're a database, specialist, because we need that skill set on the team, but here we are in sprint 10 and there's not a lot of database work, guess what? You're going to be helping with docs. You're going to be helping with tests. You're going to be helping with design. And you should be okay with that. So we want generalists on these teams, not necessarily specialists who are allergic to working outside their comfort zone. And that's another message that's hard because, as you look at the job descriptions out there and they're hiring experts at these coding, know these things, have this many years of experience. People aren't going to be hired on as a guru level Python developer and then sprint after sprint just work on testing.
So I haven't heard on what holds teams back. I haven't heard yet, we didn't have good enough developers.
No, that's not usually the case. The organizations usually have the right technical people. They just want them to work together more efficiently, more effectively. And that's where Scrum can come in, and a good consultant or a coach or a trainer, just to kind of nudge them in the right direction.
Yeah. Do you think big companies have any themes that are different from smaller companies?
I do, yeah. I think once an organization hits the 100 employee mark and they hire the HR manager, I think the fun is over. Culture shifts to structure, and now we're talking about hiring, we're talking about performance reviews, how we're rating these individuals on a yearly basis. And unless you've got an agile HR person or someone that's been infected with that same agility bug that you and I have been infected with, you could send up a real counter to agility coming from HR, and that has its fingers into everything.
You just poked a big wound in my gut with that HR manager. All right, HR manager. It seems to me that taking somebody who's not an operational executive and saying, now you're in charge of giving this company good culture. You're in charge of retention. You're in charge of finding good people. You're in charge of employee morale. You're in charge of all these other things. That very decision from CEO or division president, that very decision is basically saying, I'm taking all these things and I'm going to outsource them to another department. I'm going to get rid of them within my organization. I'm going to put it in another organization, make them in charge. Inherently, that's only going to perpetuate it's somebody else's job and it's not critical path in my organization.
That's right. Yeah, that's risky.
That wasn't a question, but
it turns out, Jeffrey, it's not hard to motivate creative people. I mean, everybody in that play, all the different cast members, the testers, developers, architects, design, every one of those people is creative in their own right. Yeah. They're creating something. And here's a pop quiz. Maybe you read Dan Pink's book, Drive. How do you motivate creative people?
They're already motivated.
Yeah, you let them create. You go figure. If we're in an organization where requirements come to the team in the form of specifications, where's the fun in that? Here's the what and the how. You've taken that creativity away from us.
Yeah.
So set up organization, set up the structure, so that teams can be self-managing and decide how to do the work as much as possible.
Well, that's an interesting angle from a creativity perspective, but move upstream. And I want to ask you about product ownership, because product owner is a key role in Scrum. What's the best way to figure out, what software should we build? What features should it have? How should we solve this problem that ultimately, the board of directors has allocated some amount of budget to fund a software team to do something?
Absolutely. I mean, I go back to the first agile value, and that is, let's go talk to people. Product ownership is one of these spectrums out there. It turns out you don't have to do very many things to be a Scrum product owner. But there are different types of Scrum product owners. Some are on one end of the spectrum, Jeffrey, where they're sort of just order takers. They're just sort of, backlog managers. Okay, here comes the next feature request. Here comes a bug. I'll put it in, we'll get it done. But they don't really think, how does this drive the value of the product? Or, should I do this before that? They just kind of, take the orders and do them in a queue. And they're little more than just, backlog monkeys, we call them. We don't want product owners like that. We want product owners who are order makers, who can, talk to the stakeholders, the users, the customers, the managers, and really come up with ideas or experiments, hypotheses. Like, gosh, if we integrate with Facebook for authentication, Would that drive more people to our website?
Hmm.
I don't know. Let's go do an experiment.
Many thanks to our podcast sponsor, ClearMeasure. ClearMeasure is a software architecture company that empowers clients' development teams to be self-sufficient, moving fast, delivering quality, and running their systems with confidence. Whether starting a new project or developing new technologies or techniques, ClearMeasure sets up your team to deliver world-class results. Learn more at www.clearmeasure.com. ClearMeasure, empowering software delivery. ClearMeasure is also happy to be a sponsor of the video podcast, Programming with Palermo. Watch, learn, and program alongside Chief Architect Jeffrey Palermo. Videos are added weekly and available on syndicated locations supporting video podcast or by visiting palermo.network. Tune in today.
That keyword, you mentioned hypothesis.
Yeah.
In my career, I've worked with somebody, who team implemented Scrum, and they designated somebody the product owner, and now suddenly that product owner, quote, got to decide what features we were going to do and what features we're not going to do. It's almost like in that case, there was an authority placed on them as they're the one that gets to, put something on the list. But inherently, isn't it just a hypothesis of, I think if we make this change to the software, then it'll have the intended and desired outcome. But how do they really know?
Yeah, they don't. I mean, we're building software here, which is, inherently complex, meaning that there's more that we don't know than there is what we do know about what it is and how to do it. It's also invisible, right? And it's also one of those things where you can have a population of people who can give you feedback, and they're not going to always agree on things. So it's tough to be a product owner, in today's age of, yes, I want it all, I want it tomorrow, and I want it to work perfectly. But I would go back to the product owner and say, yeah, you don't know. So what's the cheapest way and the quickest way you can find out if it'll work or not? Call it a spike, call it, an MVP, call it a walking skeleton, whatever. Just let's get something out there so we can start getting some feedback on it. It doesn't have to be 6 months polished, and then, healthcare.gov, like, hey, it turns out people just wanted to go to that website and get some estimates, some costs, not go through the whole process of signing up. They didn't talk to their people before they started building what turns out they didn't want.
This sounds a lot like the scientific method. I mean, we're talking about software methodologies here, but it sounds like the good old 5th and 6th grade scientific method.
Yeah. Try something, inspect it, adapt, make changes. And it's okay to stop doing something.
Mm-hmm.
There's this sunken cost fallacy. We've already spent 2 sprints. Might as well go ahead and spend 3 or 4 more sprints on it, get it done, because we've already wasted 2 sprints. I'm like, no, you've saved 4 sprints. You can learn early that it won't work. That's a win.
So would it be better to, the canonical, stereotypical frame of a user story or a backlog item, as some user, I want to do such and such would it be better to phrase it as a hypothesis? What's your favorite way to kind of keep that thinking into the artifact and communication?
No, that's good. There actually is a, what's called HDD, hypothesis driven development, where you can essentially, just like the user stories have a little, user story description format. And then you can do the same thing with hypothesis. Like, I believe that if we do this, then we will get this result. And you can put in, just like any kind of goal, by this date, this number, so it can be measured if it's a success or not. And, I've actually, you've spurred me. I think I might do a blog post on how to, go into Azure DevOps and create a new custom work item type for a hypothesis. I have this in one of my classes. I've just never really put that out there. So let me get that done. We'll get that in the show notes here. But yeah, I think product owners that are working with hypothesis, they're order makers, maybe on the scale of being their own entrepreneur, a little mini CEO of the product, which is what I think makes a great product. Is if you got a product owner who's acting as an agile product manager, making good decisions and getting that feedback, doing their own discovery, all of that. I mean, 1 out of 100 product owners I work with maybe check that box, Jeffrey. Most of them are just moving tickets through like they're just a train conductor.
1 out of 100.
Man, it's
So you're saying 1 out of 100 people who've adopted the name product owner are actually doing the right job of the product owner?
I wouldn't say they're doing the right job, because you can have a spectrum of types of product owners that are still delivering value and making their stakeholders happy. But I'm talking about the cutting edge that are driving with hypotheses, that are acting as little mini CEOs of the product, that are seeing early failure as success. All of those kind of cultural things. I don't see that at all. Very rare.
So you mentioned that. It reminds me of something. I think this was way back in 2018. Maybe it was it Puppet Labs state of DevOps report or something, and it had a finding about prioritization of a feature backlog, and it found roughly a third distribution. 1/3 of the prioritized features had the positive intended effect that they thought that it would. 1/3 didn't actually make a difference, and then 1/3 actually worked against them, and they needed to revert it as fast as possible.
Absolutely, yeah. There's been a number of surveys like that. I'm trying to think. It was I think it was Jim Highsmith or one of the Agile signatories had some surveys out from just a couple decades ago, but yeah, a large percentage, like 40 to 45% of the features created weren't used at all.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I'm liking this concept of lean UX, which is, let's do this experimentation. So, Jeffrey, let's role play a minute here. You're my manager, and you say, Richard, you've got to have this export, to XML feature, right there on the main screen. We need to have it. I'm thinking to myself, really? I'm the product owner, but you're my boss.
Can we make the button Battleship Gray? Come on, Richard.
Yeah, right. So, and we got to export to XML because you love XML, but nobody today uses XML. And I'm thinking, okay, well, I don't want to not do it. So I'll go ahead and create the button, Battleship Gray button, says export to XML. And when you click it, rather than actually doing it, it's going to say, thank you for voting for this feature. And it's going to track the telemetry. So I'm going to actually do an experiment and say, in the next 90 days, how many people click this button? Now, is that disingenuous, or is that, pretty clever, experimentation?
Like a strategy. Yeah, come up and say, hey, we're planning on making this feature. Thanks for voting it. And if nobody ever sees the message, we're planning on making this feature, then you haven't told anyone that you're planning on making the feature.
That's right. Then I only have to worry about my boss. That's you. And, I can just give you an XML document from 2005 and you won't know the difference.
Right. That's really interesting. And that means from an executive perspective, even if it's not a third or 40%, even if you round it off in rough numbers and you're better than average, but half of the work that your team does is literally waste.
Yeah. And now I'm going to blow your mind. So most teams out there, most organizations out there don't track that, don't think about that, and don't even care about that. They are so focused on story points, burn downs, burn ups, velocities, hours, days, plans. They don't think about outcomes. They don't think about impacts.
So roughly, you could double the output of the team just by thinking more critically and shortening the experimentation cycle to whittle out that half that's just not making a difference for you.
Well, yeah. I mean, even output doesn't really have that much of a meaning unless what you're outputting has outcome to it.
Yeah, true.
I want to walk you through something real quick.
Okay.
Resources, activities, outputs, outcomes, and impacts. So there's 5 different levels here.
Okay.
Resources would be things like the people, Azure DevOps, your Azure subscription, your Visual Studio license, your Azure SQL subscription. Those are the things that are pretty easy to obtain. And, you might have a resource manager okay, here, let me give you another Azure subscription. So,
yeah.
resources don't mean anything. They're kind of the tools and the basic materials you need to do anything.
Sure.
With those resources, we do activities. We create a repo. We create a pipeline. We write some code. We write some tests. We run some tests. We create some Azure resources. We deploy to Azure. We do a bunch of tasks. Okay. Some people stop right there and go, this is the good stuff. We can see, that took you 80 hours to do all those things. You originally estimated 75. That's within variance. The project managers are happy. Good. You're doing good. Your team is doing good because you got all your tasks done and they were within norms of variation. Okay. Yeah. You and I are thinking, who cares? We did a bunch of things. We banged on the keyboard. Oh, we created an output. Okay. So we're at the third level, outputs. We deployed a web-based app to Azure. Okay. Some people celebrate that. Yeah, we got something done. After sprint 7, we did a release to production. It's up there. Output, high five, champagne. And I'm like, it's too soon to celebrate.
Yeah.
Resources, activities, and outputs are easy to measure. They don't have any value necessarily. Organizations stop right there because that's all they know how to measure. What you and I know this, but where it starts to kick in is, okay, what outcomes came from the output of deploying that app to Azure? Well, in this example, we reduced the time people spent creating timesheets. Now they can spend more time on other activities. That's an outcome.
Mm-hmm.
And then how does that impact? Now thinking about the broader impact of those outcomes. Well, business becomes more successful. Employees are happier. They don't have to do as much admin work. They can make more money for the company. Outcomes and impacts are where we should be focused from the coder and the tester all the way up to the product owner. Not just thinking about tickets and, PRs and all the stuff we get so wrapped up in. Is how does this roll into things that make people's lives better?
Yeah. Love it. Yeah, there's so much like software and e-commerce. The outcome could be increase the average shopping cart by $1.
Mm-hmm.
And that's worth it. As opposed to just, it looks prettier.
Yeah. You did a bunch of things and we got a release note and you're like, okay, but that doesn't make my life any better.
Right. Very cool. So I'll come back to this 1% of product owners are, I guess, doing the function like Scrum really intended it to be. And at the small level, I mean, there's some small teams that literally have no one named product owner.
No.
But somebody's doing it, right? Just naturally?
Yes. So I want to just clarify something. I'm not saying 1% of product owners are doing it according to the Scrum Guide. I think the numbers are quite a bit larger. I'm talking about product owners who are really thinking like a CEO of the product.
Okay.
Who are really like laser focused on outcomes and impacts, like I want them to be. But the Scrum Guide doesn't say you have to be focused on outcomes and impacts. Now, to your question, what if you don't have a product owner? I run into teams all the time that don't have product owners, and they'd say, "Well, we just have a backlog, and we just kind of do the next thing that needs to be done, and it works out pretty well." And then my follow-up question is, well, who orders the work? Who says this item is more, prioritized than that item? And the answer is, I don't know. Or the customers, usually who yells the loudest, we do their thing the next, or whatever. So there's no single person that's, accountable for driving the value of the work done by the team. And that's sad.
I do remember sometimes earlier in my career where there was customers and people who needed to support the customer, and there were people to talk to, but there was nobody who was coalescing that to say, okay, how are we going to meet the actual request? And I ended up, as the job described, I ended up kind of being, now I was the team lead, the software team lead, but I ended up kind of being the product owner because I was the one that ended up talking with people and saying, okay, is this going to actually make a difference? No, let's switch some things up. I mean, I was doing all those mental gyrations and coming up with hypotheses, doing the job, but I was just the lead developer.
Mm-hmm. That's fine. You don't have to have a full-time product owner. I think that's preferable because I think there's a lot. If we were to take a pie chart and divide the day or the week or the sprint up for a product owner, I think, a good third of their time should be spent with the stakeholders, users, customers, managers, people who are going to be directly using the product or who care about the product's, development. A good third of their time, I think, should be spent with the product, playing with it themselves and seeing where they're going to invest some more time and money in, looking at competitive products, all of that. And then I think a good third of their time should be spent with the developers, making sure that the current sprint work is meeting definition of done. I think a healthy definition of done should have something in there that says the product owner, approves it, the product owner likes it, the product owner loves it. And that forces that collaboration. It's not there by default in Scrum. Once the sprint begins, there's nothing that says the developers have to even check with the product owner. Just, you need to meet definition of done. If that excludes the product owner, that excludes the product owner. So I think it's healthy, and we teach in our classes that product owner in some way should be in that definition of done to force them to come in and have a look at it and give some feedback on it, mid-sprint, early sprint.
Yeah. So as we wrap up, this podcast has a ton of developers listening, and I'm sure some of them are listening. It's like, oh, my such and such, he needs to hear this, she needs to hear this. God, what's a good avenue for getting the right people in a software team to connect with this message that you're preaching here?
Sure. So I'm a Scrum guy, but I know that there's a lot of teams out there that are practicing Kanban or none of the above.
Mm-hmm.
And developers, I'm one of you. In fact, I've only been sort of focused on product ownership for the last couple of years because for the first 30 years of my life, I've been coding, testing, architecting, designing, and that's how I think about things. I've always looked at Scrum from that point of view. Mm-hmm. But here's a way to think about it. Developers, and I'm using the term developers to include all the technical people, testers, architects, designers, database people, operations people, tech writers, BAs, whatever. You own the how. You own how will we do this work, the plan, the actual, technical piece of it. The product owner, or whatever you want to call them, my product owner in my classes is Paula, the product owner. Paula owns the what is going to be built. And if this what has more value and is more timely than that what over here, we put it higher in the backlog. So even if you don't have someone named product owner or product manager, someone should, one person, one single authority should be the person that orders the work. And newsflash, if you've got something high value, low effort, right, which is high ROI, put that at the top. If you've got something low value, high effort, put it at the bottom or delete it. But there should be someone sort of looking after the math on all this stuff so that you don't build features people don't want. You don't build features people hate. You do minimal amount of work to prove hypotheses and then, continue on if it proves out. But someone needs to be looking after the shop like that. Because as you know, Jeffrey, you and I are developers. We're just like, hey, keep the hopper full of work and I'm happy.
Yeah. Hey, programming is fun. And sometimes it's easy to just put some blinders on and scratch the technical itch because, wow, I got to do this new feature and use this new C# language that I hadn't been able to use before. I'm happy.
So I'm waiting for Copilot for product owners. There's a couple companies playing with that, but it's a little rough.
Well, it should be easy to detect if maybe some of the definition is sliding too much into specifying the how.
That's right. Or being able to tap into a wealth of knowledge out there to come up with acceptance criteria. Hey, I want this new dashboard. What might be some common acceptance criteria that you've seen across the millions of other dashboard user stories you've looked at?
So you don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Right.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Richard, thanks so much for coming back on the show and sharing with us all about Scrum and product ownership. This is great.
Yeah, I like talking about this, so I'm sure we'll chat again.
And for you yourself, because you do the training, how can people check out your offerings?
Sure. My website is accentient.com. It's ACCENTIENT.com. Or you can also go to an easier website, which is upgradeyourteam.com. And you can find there all the classes and training offerings and other services that we provide.
Very cool. include those links to the show notes. Very good. Very good. All right. And dear listener, until next time, keep shipping.
You've been listening to the Azure DevOps Podcast, a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Go to www.azuredevops.show for show notes and other episodes. On behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, and our sponsors, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.